Welcome back. Another episode of the Full Subjects podcast. There's been some things in the news, Cole, that we're going to talk about. Some of them related to housing, some of them related to everything else. So excited to break that down. As always, guys, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute any legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. It's not intended to cause or induce breach of any existing agency agreement. Cole, what do we have going on? What are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so one of the bigger announcements in housing, I would say in 2026 so far, has probably been this recent announcement. So there's a joint announcement between both the federal government in Canada as well as the BC provincial government, and it has to do with investment into infrastructure is kind of how it's tailored, but there's a lot more to it than that. So we're going to look at that today. The magic number for that investment is $5 billion. There's we're going to break down things a little bit more than that. We're going to look at where some of that money is intended to go. We'll throw some more numbers at you and where that amount of money is going to be spent. $5 billion is not a small number. It is supposed to be over the course of 10 years. So it's not a lump sum investment, and is coming from both BC and the federal government. Now, it's worth noting that anybody that lives in BC is going to be impacted by that, because at the end of the day, that money is going to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from taxpayer dollars. So anybody that works in BC is likely going to be helping fund this $5 billion investment one way or another. But yeah, let's break it down a little bit more, Austin. Let's look at what some of the targets are within this investment. Austin and I will have our opinions on this, but as Austin's already said, there are opinions. Not all of this is going to be factual. Like, we're going to give facts as much as we can, but there's going to be some opinion in here. We'll try to be as neutral as possible, but it's not always easy to do that. So I just want a little extra disclaimer today, just because I think it's worth noting.
Yeah, very, very well said. And obviously with that too, there's announcements, and then more information kind of trickles out. So we're going to do our best to, talk about what's provided so far, as well as probably as more information comes out, I'm sure this is not the last time that we'll be talking about this. So what was announced? So in total, it was $5 billion in federal investments across British Columbia for over the next decade. Those categories include development change reductions, infrastructure, public transit, healthcare infrastructure, affordable housing conversions. That was the big one, the big talking point that you've seen in the last a week or so in the real estate world. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as well as community infrastructure. And, instead of only housing funding directly, the governments are investing in the systems required to support the new housing. So let's talk about that. You want to do development charges first? Yeah, let's do that. We'll go in the same order. So this was probably the most important piece of the announcement, let's say. The government's going to provide up to $3.2 billion to reduce development charges by as much as 50% in priority communities, and developers could save up to $40,000 per housing unit. That's a pretty big deal.
There's some big numbers there, right? I mean, $3.2 billion is obviously a huge number. That's a huge chunk of the over $5 billion investment. To my understanding, the $3.2 billion is, I don't know if it's a 50-50 split, but it is a split between federal and provincial in terms of where those funds are coming from. And to my knowledge, I haven't seen any details about what they're considering priority communities at this point. I have not done a lot of investigation on that, but I'm curious to see what that means and what those communities are. And we'll like we said before, we're going to follow up on this. This is not a major headline that's going to go away unless all of a sudden they decide, hey, we're not doing any of this. But that's not going to happen. Parts of this will happen at minimum, and more than what's already been stated may also happen. So there's going to be a lot more to this than just the initial announcements that we're covering here. I mean, $40,000 a unit, Austin, is quite a bit. I mean, you can imagine that over multiple unit buildings, that's going to save a lot of money. It can be millions of dollars when we're talking about multi-unit buildings. Like, when I'm talking multi-unit, I mean 10, more than 10, like tens of units, if not hundreds of units. And on top of that, though, I think what we should do is we should talk about development charges. Like, I'm not an expert in development charges. Austin probably has a bit more knowledge than I do in this because he works on that side a little bit more. But let's talk a little bit about that, why there may be a reason why they're doing this in terms of why are they trying to subsidize this for developers. But yeah, let's talk about those charges, Austin. So what are some of those things that a developer has to take on, maybe even before they actually start selling units and actually getting some of that money back?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it almost comes down like the way I would describe it almost as like utilities. So, that can include like roads, sewers, water, park, community centers. And yeah, utilities is one of those things. And a way to think about this is the developer takes on the cost of obviously doing this up front. So it's like if you have a plot of land that doesn't have homes on it and you want to put homes on it, you're going to need things like, breaking news. Like you're going to need things like water and sewer and electricity and like stuff to service that area if it isn't as, necessarily readily available there, or if it is readily available and you need to upgrade that. So like as an example, if you were to, if you had 4 or 5 single family homes that you're going to turn into a land development, which is going to turn into condos or townhomes, like you're going to need more services to those areas. Again, breaking news. So it's like upgrading that. And obviously with that too, and I'm sure this is going to fall under the other, some of the categories like permits as an example. So what happens is this is required by the developers to pay for
Hmm.
in order to, get this site up and running. But what ultimately ends up happening is that cost is then transferred to the end user because,
Hmm.
developers are a business. They are not going to, take a loss on a building. Like it has to make sense for them from a business decision to build and sell these homes. Or what's going to happen, and we've seen this over the last, year or two, developers aren't going to start new projects because it's like, if they're going to
Exactly.
build at a loss, they're not interested in doing that. So, what do you have to add on that?
I mean, I think that's really a big part of it is developers are going to have to pass along the cost one way or another. And I think the
Hmm.
big question then becomes, is that going to save buyers $40,000 a unit? No, it's not. Let's be honest. It's not going to immediately drop the price of those units by that amount. The other thing that I was thinking about, and we've got some notes on this too, is how's that going to impact municipalities? Because municipalities are expecting to get this amount of money and now they're not going to receive it.
Hmm.
Municipalities are important to that community and to how things are funded within that community. So
They're
at
a
the end of
business as well.
that's what I
If you
mean. The
think
money's
about
got
it,
to
they
come
need the
from
revenue.
somewhere. So are we
Yeah.
taking money away and then somewhere else it's got to be made up? Like it just seems like you're just moving the problem from one area to another. That's what it sounds like at a root level. But it will this, I guess the really big question is it going to provide the ability for developers to build more homes? Because as many people probably feel right now, we don't need more homes. We've got lots of inventory. There's lots of options right now. The reality is though, we're going to need more homes. That's always going to be the case. The stats show that we're not going to have enough homes in the future. Population growth will pick up again and we will see a shortage again at some point, the way that things are being projected. So I think that's what this is aimed at, but it does beg the question, where's the money going to ultimately come from for the municipalities if they're not getting it from the developers? And then at what point does this actually benefit the consumer, if it does at all?
Well, I think what I would add to that too, it's not just homes. We need homes that people can afford to purchase,
That,
right?
yeah, for sure.
And I know there's like an affordable housing thing that we'll be talking about in a bit because that's all part of this. But like, there's a ton of inventory and prices are continuing to drop on that. But still, like, it is, I don't want to say unaffordable, but it is more expensive than people can also afford to buy right now. So,
Yeah, for sure.
and that's one of the reasons that it's sitting. So that's problematic. You know what I mean? Like they're by investing all of this and yeah, it's just it's multi-layered. And I know that we're going to talk about some of the other parts. So, let's talk about kind of practically. So if this was a 200 unit project, and it was $40,000 per unit, that's $8 million in reduction in project costs. 200 times 40 grand.
Yeah.
That's how that works. So roughly 8 million bucks. That might help projects be more financially viable for the builders, as well as if, assuming that cost is saved to the end buyer, is that going to save them money? I mean, in theory, yes. And specifically, that's why I'm saying in theory. So, are the buyers going to save that 40 grand? Probably not. The developers aren't necessarily going to pass along that whole cost directly to buyers. They're probably going to use some of that to reduce the project costs to help them be more profitable enough to build. So the benefit is probably just going to be more housing starts and more competition and increased supply.
Yeah. The supply is exactly awesome. Supply will hopefully keep up or be not as bad in the future as it could be, which supply does help with affordability as we're seeing now. More supply gives you more options and typically can either bring prices down or can make them stabilize. So all those things to the consumer, yeah, for sure that may be a good thing. But you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, this is a great idea, right? Because all of a sudden, okay, it's going to be less expensive to build. That means they can probably sell for less, and that seems like an awesome idea. But if I can contrast that with something that we've seen, let's say you purchased a home a year ago,
Hmm.
and hypothetically, or most likely right now, that home might be worth slightly less than what you paid for. Okay. So let's say you spent 500 grand on a condo and maybe now that's worth 475 or 480 or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, they come out with this project, which in theory, it's going to be 40 grand less to build, which means 40 grand less to the end user. So now the market value on that home is $40,000 less. So everybody that has entered the market and paid this price, now because of comparable sales, it's worth this. Like, that is problematic for people that have already entered the market. It's kind of like when we saw the GST rebate for first time home buyers. Like, as much as it's great that you can save GST if you're a first time home buyer up to a certain percentage. Like, that's awesome. But also for the people that had purchased something and paid GST and had the 5% as part of their market value, now magically their home is worth 5% less. That's not good. Like, you're kind of in a weird way punishing people that are already in the market. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, but it's an interesting predicament, right? Because yes, you're doing that. You are potentially punishing the people that have already entered the market and maybe entered the market at the time that was right for them.
Yeah.
And you're maybe giving the people that are not yet to enter the market an advantage relative to what those other people that entered the market recently. The reality is not everybody is going to benefit from every new initiative or every
Totally.
new
It's a great point.
incentive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to always be like the example I was giving, like municipalities may take a hit, and there is parts of this, and I wanted to touch on this really quickly that municipalities are going to get some funding as well, but
Hmm.
it's never going to benefit everybody, I guess, is
Totally.
the
Yeah. It's a
hard reality of it, right? Like none of these incentives, policies, whichever, are going to help everybody win. I think where people are pushing back right now, and we're gonna kind of transition here at the same time as talking about this, is the developer. Are we seeing the developers being incentivized too much? Are we seeing an opportunity for additional profits to the developers that may or may not be something that the average consumer wants to see? Because at the end of the day, like there's lots of developers that are not doing so great and there's developers that are doing okay. So there's two different, there's probably more than two different buckets there, but there's different companies are doing either well or not well right now.
hmm
So it's that I can see from the average consumer perspective, excuse me, that why are we giving developers a break? Like, why are
Yeah,
we doing that?
it's a
Right?
business. Yeah, they're a business, and you've seen arguments from both sides. Like, on one end, they're a business, and they were very successful for many years, making a good amount of money on their projects, and the pendulum has swung the other way, and now they're struggling, to say the least. And there's a bunch of units that are finished that are vacant, which we're obviously going to talk about the conversion program coming up next.
Yeah, go ahead. Get right into it.
Yeah, okay, let's pivot to that and then we'll come back to the municipal perspective. So, condo conversion program. So, government's also announced a partnership to convert over 2,200 vacant condos units into affordable housing. So, instead of waiting years to build new homes, governments are looking at existing inventory. So, again, these units are done. These units are ready for people to move in, and they're going to convert those into affordable housing. So, construction takes years. Condos that are available already exist. If financing helps governments acquire or repurpose them, the affordable housing can become available much faster. And it's one of the quickest ways to increase housing availability. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I've got a lot of questions about this one. This is, I think of the consumers that are going to be negatively impacted by this, because I mean, it's unlikely that you're going to find 2,200 vacant condos in one building. It's not like an entire
Yeah, it's
building is
just
going to be
scattered
converted.
everywhere.
It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be scattered. So you're going to have people that have bought in that building that have paid market value at the time. Is this now going to depreciate the value of that home because now there's affordable housing in there? Not to mention, what are they paying for these vacant homes? Because Mark,
Hmm.
as Austin can speak to, and could probably do a whole series on how to actually determine market value. This this is going to have a negative impact on market value, more than likely on units within that same building. So that's not necessarily positive for the people that have bought in that building recently, or maybe have bought in that building and haven't even lived there yet because it hasn't completed. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions about that. Are they going to be rentals? Are they going to be like for sale units? Are they going to stay affordable housing permanently? Like, there's a lot of unknowns here. And yeah, location, that's a big one. So I, I imagine you have some similar thoughts, but let's hear what
Well,
you got to say.
yeah, I mean, it also comes back to, I feel like we keep coming back to this point, but the idea of, the affordable housing and prices and, I don't know if juxtaposition is the right word, but the contrast
Mhm.
of like people that are wanting to enter the market that can't afford to need the prices to drop in order
Mhm.
to be able to buy those, right? But the problem with that is the people in the market are benefiting from or sorry, are not as incentivized or would prefer
No,
that prices don't drop, obviously,
of
right?
course.
So, these are the two contrasting problems that we're trying to deal with right now because I just think it comes down to a price thing, right? Where it's like, if you drop the prices on these things enough, it's no different than when we have a listing, right? If it's not selling and you're getting showings or getting feedback or we're seeing other listings that are selling at a certain price, like that's market value. Like that's something that you can't necessarily change. But again, the problem with prices continuing to fall is people that are in the market are also losing money, losing equity, losing leverage, all that kind of stuff. So it's two very contrasting needs, let's say.
Yeah, I think one of the other things about this affordable homes initiative, I think Mark Carney didn't do himself any favors, because he was quoted by saying developers don't want to sell at a loss. I
Nobody
mean,
does.
no shit. Like, I'm sorry, but like, of course they don't. So, but why I think that's a really important quote is because it makes it sound like they're going to pay full price for these condos because they don't want to sell at a loss. And then are they going to then turn around and sell them at a loss, or are they going to turn around? Like, what's they're basically saying, we don't want the developers to take a loss, but we're going to allow a loss to occur somewhere else. That's what it kind of sounded like. So that's a bit concerning to me, but I don't know.
Well, then,
This is probably the most, I don't know if the negative is the right word, but this is the one that I think, the one area of this announcement that's getting the most attention and the most flack, I guess.
yeah, I was
Because
gonna say, like, to put this really bluntly, like they're getting torched for this.
yeah, this is
Like
not a
it's,
part of it a lot of people are loving.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious to see what comes of this. I know the number 2,200 was thrown out there. I've heard that's a bit of a ballpark number. It could be higher, it could be lower. Very curious to see where these end up, and whether or not this actually happens, more than anything.
Yeah, let's obviously this is the real estate and house stuff which obviously
Mhm.
catches our attention. Let's talk about some of the other stuff. So there's transit investment
Yep.
as well. So yeah, so the transit investment. So another major announcement, $2.5 billion over the next 10 years. And the headline project was obviously the Surrey Langley our SkyTrain extension. Where I live, I get to see this and feel it getting stuck in traffic along Fraser Highway
Mhm.
as the extension is being done. So to can kind of see this project in action. Transit changes communities. History has shown that rapid transit often leads to higher property values, increased density, redevelopment, greater developer interest. Obviously, it's a big investment, but as population increases and people need to be able to get around and they have jobs, transit, all that kind of stuff, like obviously it's needed. You've seen that even through the greater Vancouver area. You saw it through the Fraser Valley in like, Surrey, and obviously now it's being extended farther out. So yeah, it's well needed. With where we are out in Langley, getting downtown if you need to is kind of a bit of a pain in the butt.
Hmm.
Like even just little stuff like to go to, obviously the World Cup is in our city right now, and to get downtown for that, it's kind of difficult. It's an hour drive finding parking. Obviously, with that, they encourage transit, and even like like some of the main hubs, it's tough to find parking around there, or it's getting utilized. So anyway, it's going to be better, obviously, to have this SkyTrain done once it's done.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's transportation is vital, and you often see transportation lagging behind development or like home development, as well as business development. And to me, that's a huge issue because you're placing people somewhere where they can't get around, and that's always going to be a problem. But thankfully, this expansion to the Langley, the Surrey Langley SkyTrain expansion is coming. I mean, I still think it's behind, to be honest. I still think there's
Yeah.
room for further expansion, but it's good that they're moving forward with that. I don't know. I think you touched on it really well. I don't think there's much else to talk about there. Transit needs to continue to be invested in. And the other thing that's important to this is healthcare. Like healthcare infrastructure is another part of this investment, committing over $1 billion towards hospitals, emergency rooms, which is great. The facilities are important. We need the facilities as much as, but we also need the people in order to staff these facilities and make sure that people, just because we have the facility doesn't mean we actually have the it means we have the capacity, but it doesn't mean we actually have the resources to manage what's going on. So that's another aspect of it. I don't believe that was discussed as part of this. That is an entirely separate thing, but health infrastructure is always going to be important, because as you have more people, you have more demand and more need for that. So that's another aspect of this. So I mean, there's definitely some good in the sense of investing in things that are necessary, I would say, as part of this bigger announcement. There's some other investments here. I don't I don't think we necessarily need to go into that. I'd rather tie this more back to what we're here for, which is real estate and how is this going to impact buyers, sellers, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. Does that sound good, Austin?
Yeah, it sounds fair. I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so what does this mean for buyers and sellers? For buyers, we've talked about potentially some reduction in development costs. Could it help lead to price stability or even prices coming down further? It remains to be seen. We're not expecting any immediate shifts in the pricing of the market. You're not going to immediately see, oh, because of this announcement, everything's dropped X amount. That's not going to happen. Um, it takes a long time to build things, as we know. This is supposed to help streamline that, but it's not going to expedite it substantially. It's hard for a lot of people to grasp this, and I feel like a broken record saying it, but supply will likely become an issue again, and they're trying to do what they can to avoid that issue. But is it enough? Is it the right course of action? Those are the questions that remain to be seen here. Any thoughts on that, Austin? If not, I'm going to ask you, what do you think it means for a seller's perspective?
I mean, typically the infrastructure will support property values. You saw that.
Right.
I mean, obviously in Greater Vancouver, as they kind of expanded transit, same thing. You saw it through Surrey as well.
Mm.
That's good. Obviously, receiving new transit also means like new hospitals, new schools, and utilities tend to become more desirable. So that's
Mhm.
obviously good as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. For investors, I think this is a tough topic because we've seen a lot of investment in the Lower Mainland over the last decade, and a lot of people have done really, really well. I mean, beyond the last decade, but there's lots of people that have done well. There's other people that maybe haven't done as well, and there's policies in place that have changed whether or not investments as desirable in these markets. But again, tying this back to the root of this announcement, the infrastructure is areas that are going to receive these new transit, better access to utilities, improvements of roads. We didn't talk about roads too much, but roads, utility upgrades, like we talked about. I would imagine it gives more peace of mind or more confidence in these communities to invest in the long term. I'm a believer that if you're going to invest in something, you need to be committed to investing. If you're going to invest in real estate, it's something you need to be committed to the long term. Long are the days where, not to take this episode off the rails too much, where you could buy and flip pre-sales every month and make a few bucks. We're not in that investor market right now. We may never ever see that again, but it needs to be a long-term commitment if you're looking to invest, from my perspective.
Very, 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 very well said. Let's wrap this up. Any
Sure.
final thoughts for you?
I think there's a lot of unknowns here. I think there's still a lot to be desired in terms of what's actually going to come of this. I think there's some good. I think there's some potential issues with these announcements. One of the big things that we talked about is you're never going to benefit everybody. There's always going to be some group that is going to probably be negatively impacted by some of these investments or some of these policy changes. But as a government, it's your job to kind of manage that, I would think, right? To try to manage who's being impacted and who's benefiting from this. And I can see that there's a lot of people that are frustrated with the rhetoric around what this investment looks like, because it looks like a developer bailout. I mean, I think a lot of it does look like that, and it's really
That's what all the articles I'm seeing are basically called.
And I mean, and that's a big. I mean, don't get me wrong. Putting out the headline "developers bailed out," that's really catchy and really desirable to read about, right? Like, you see that and you're like, "Oh, what is this all about?" Especially if you're not local to the area and you're not aware of the market, you're going to read that as someone else in Canada and go, "What? Why are they getting bailed out?" Like, is that going to happen in Ontario now? You know what I mean? You think of the greater Toronto area, like, are we going to start to see some of that happen in areas like that? So it's definitely a catchy headline. I understand that, but there's definitely some negative associated with it, is what I would say. What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, very well said. I mean, I'll be honest, how do I say this nicely?
You don't have to.
There's a lot of good intentions with a lot of these announcements, but the quote unquote bailout, I just think is like crazy. Like, I just think
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I just don't see. And again, we work in like, full disclosure, obviously we work in real estate, and obviously prices being prices are, part of it is what it is, but most people invest in real estate with an understanding that, like, yeah, it's going to go up in value over an extended period of time. And obviously in the last year or two, we've seen the opposite. We've seen some declining prices, and there's a multitude of reasons for that. But I don't know, it just kind of feels like that's business, and the developers kind of had it good for a while. And obviously the pendulum has swung the other way. And yeah, realistically, it's tax dollars that is being used to buy the units that are vacant. And I don't know, it just kind of seems ass backwards, to be honest with you. So just my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I'll definitely make sure we put out your take everywhere and get you blasted out there. But
yeah, I appreciate it.
In all seriousness, though, it's like we said at the top, just to wrap things up here, is we have our own opinions on this. A lot of the information that we provided today was factual, or it was based on information that we found online. But we're still going to have our opinions, and we're still going to be okay with changing our opinions too. I think that's important. Like, as more information comes out, our sentiment may shift, but it's hard not to feel that way about certain things right now.
And again, you've kind of joked about this, and the converting it to affordable housing and some of the incentives or intentions that they're trying to do, like, that stuff is great. That stuff is needed. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying. I know you were joking, but again, some of these items are definitely needed, like, for sure, absolutely, unequivocally. Like, yes, we need more affordable housing. But also, housing needs to be kind of affordable too. And that's what we were seeing for people getting into the market, right? So, and those prices, it just feels like it's kind of being propped up a little bit. And again, if you're in a home, this is great news, that you're basically insulating or inflating the floor to dry up some of this inventory. And again, if you're in the market, that is great. But, if you're not, and this was kind of just the natural nature taking its course of prices and everything else, not as great. So let's just leave it at that.
All right, let's leave it at that, guys. Thanks so much for listening today. Austin normally does this, but I guess I'm going to take a stab at it. If you guys haven't listened, if you guys have been listening, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. 5-star reviews go a really long way. So please leave us one of those if you can too. Anything else, Austin, I missed?
Make sure to share this episode if you found it good. And as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank